the name of this panel, we called it Food City Means Business City. So we're moving the entire humanity into cities. How will that affect food business going forward? Sverker, will everyone in the world buy food from Ocados in the future? Or can there be an old food system in an urban world?
There will always be diversity. There will always be, obviously, farmers markets. There will always be little shops in the corner. The technology will change them as well. It will give them more opportunity, of course. We believe that most people with families will find it extremely convenient to get the home delivery. So we are working with, I should actually say that Ocado, we've decided that we will only sell food in England. We will only sell technology in the rest of the world to other people who will sell food. So that's the way it might happen. But we believe that probably around, I don't know, half of all the food will be sold in our model with a home delivery. We believe that I personally believe that the next step will be to be able to put the food somewhere on your way home from wherever you are. So you should be able to, if you have your big weekly shop, we give it to you when you're home anyway. But if you just have inspiration, I want something pretty soon, we'll figure out where you are, where you're going to, and we'll make sure that there's somewhere along the way where you can pick up the food.
But do you then consider this to be a food object or a service?
It's a very interesting distinction when you think about how you prepare that sort of semi-prepared food, if we call it that, sort of halfway made meals, if we call it that, that gives you simplicity, but you still have your own inspiration. You can create something amazing for yourself, depending on how much time you have on that day. So that, I think, is where the service element comes into it. Actually, to what extent is it being prepared for you, and to what extent are you doing it all yourself?
John, question for you. We're shipping the entire humanity into cities, but half of those cities haven't been built yet. What will those cities look like? Well, I think you're a man of the big thoughts, so I thought.
I mean, pragmatically, they will look like the sort of car-driven monstrosities that we've generated in the last 100 years, because that is one of the problems. Is we have an economy that requires a certain model of production and consumption, but that's changing reasonably fast. All right, it's not maybe changing fast enough to solve the sort of spatial arrangement of all those cities. I think they could look like car-driven sort of commuter arrangements on the American model. But to say what may happen, and it's partly contingent on how fast all the guys in this room get their shit together and start catching up with this guy. If we want to have inherently more efficient cities, one of the ways that we do that is by designing better economies that configure those cities. The two are not distinct from each other. And one of the main reasons why this is a profoundly interesting business is not because consumers get convenient shit on the way from work. It's because, just to take one dimension of it, logistics is massively more efficient if you let these guys do it for you. Okay, what we call people going to the shops in cars in our business and universe is amateur logistics. It's just nonsense. Don't do it. The cities are designed for that shit. Parking here and pick up small shops and boutiques there for your running to get is useless. And so if you think that convenience and consumer choice and so forth is ideal, let's let the experts solve it for you with those gigantic warehouses and the freakish robots. That's the way to do it. And that's actually configuring a city for efficiency based on, here we go, service-based models of logistics. Right? You decompose the economy into the efficient use of the substrates that produce stuff to discover that the guys who do logistics as a service better than anybody else are these guys. So you can configure the city for efficiency, and that means arranging an economy around. It's not just services, but that's a big chunk of it.
It's just prohibiting cars, and then the thing is done, right? So.
It's not prohibiting cars. It's just saying cars are super inefficient for the purposes to which they're ascribed, right?
Yeah. Olof, you've been working a lot with smart cities before you converted to Foodtech. Well, of course, those two are related. But what's your take on the future habitat of man, the city, and the efficiencies that we can create through building smarter cities with food at the core?
Well, easy question.
Another small question.
Yeah. No, but I think I think it's very important to distinguish between what we can say about the future and what we cannot say about the future. And I hate myself and colleagues when we mix that up, right? I mean, no one can tell us exactly what the interest rate will be tomorrow morning, but we can say what how people will live 10 years from now. I mean, it's a super clear trend, as we all know, that people are moving into cities. We tend to forget that sometimes. That there are now nations being cities. Looking 2050, the vast majority of people will be living in cities. Now, I personally don't like that because I would like to live on a mountaintop somewhere. But I mean, I'm just observing that that's how we organize society. And obviously, we need to adapt to that in a way. I mean, maybe there is a new form of economy, but it's definitely a new form of logistics and infrastructure that's needed. A society where everyone lives in one place with all the talent and the capital and the infrastructure and the logistics and our lives basically, right? And where food in some magical ways is assumed to come from somewhere else. I think it's if nothing else, it's very, very vulnerable. And I'm an old army officer myself. A country like Sweden, we have like 48 hours of self-sufficiency of food before the population starts starving. That means, civilization is basically 2 food deliveries away for the nation. We need to sort that out in the future cities, one way or the other. Either smarter logistics or, getting the food from somewhere else.
Is that John? So mega cities, supply chains are cut. Everyone dies 48 hours later. Are the cities we think about today too vulnerable, or is there another type of city we will see in the future?
So now I'm switching out of my kind of current professional work in the service economy, enabling it to kind of sustainable city design. I think that we have to get used to the idea that we live in a infrastructural age, and not just that, in a machine age, in a machine age where some of them infrastructures are machines and computers, and kind of get used to it. And the idea that we can kind of have, very near food supply chain stuff is basically bollocks. It's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. And we just have to get used to protecting our supply chains. I mean, I think we can lengthen the supply chain so there's, more time in terms of capacity if the supply chains go down. But in reality, infrastructures of electricity and broadband and water and, and medicine supply, it's not just food that is on a supply chain or a sort of infrastructural scale. And what I would say is we need to start thinking like infrastructural societies and stop pretending that we're sort of, still really got one foot in the rural economy. We don't. We are infrastructure scale. And so what that means is let's think it through seriously, right? So what I would say in terms of food production is essentially be super, super disciplined about ideas like urban farming, for example. Urban farming would never ever solve the supply chain problems and supply problems because there just isn't any land for a start, and the cost is ridiculous, and the energy balance is generally speaking wrong, and the chemical balance is probably wrong. But what you can use urban farming for is certain high value things that create, nature amenities, pollution management, jobs, certain kinds of pieces of the food supply chain, herbs, whatever it may be. You can also be creatively using infrastructure partners once they start to scale to improve that model. So, for example, you were talking, Sverker, about growing in your factories. Well, one model, for example, sort of speculative model of food production, and when these guys' supply chains get better and better, partly because we help them with building integration, is that you will allow people to grow at home and to send the crops back to you for processing. In the same way that you have energy at home on your roof, which goes back through the grid if the grid is set up for it. This is a food grid, if you like. So let's get on with it, right? So we can think this stuff through in a systemic way, but we shouldn't pretend that we can kind of do hobby farming here and there and think that will solve the supply chain problem. We live in big infrastructural cities. Food is not the only supply chain issue. And so let's get that into our heads and think as an infrastructural scale society.
So, Sverker, how do you try to educate the builders out there to build houses that will enable your infrastructure to hook into them? Do you do that?
We're not quite there yet, to be honest. I work in England, and England is very conservative society, and it's kind of, they still build houses out of bricks and think that's a good thing, and so it's a tough place to change. We only sell about 1.5 or 2% of all the food in England right now, so we haven't gone there yet, but I think I think one important distinction is with food is there are two kinds of food fundamentally. There's short life fresh stuff, and then there's long life stuff. And the long life stuff typically can then be transported across the globe for almost no energy at all. You can put a very big ship that you put wheat in, and you can run it across the world, and it's less energy than me taking my electric car to the store 2 kilometers away, essentially, to buy a loaf of bread. So that sort of global economy is for the long life stuff that doesn't really perish. And then you have the perishable stuff. That's where you want to be really close to the consumer, because the perishable stuff, not only does it go bad, but it requires a lot of energy to keep it fresh as well. And that's where you need to be close. And I think that's kind of the important distinction there.
Okay, wonderful. By the way, any questions from the audience? Everything is solid, clear. You knew this already, right? So, okay, wonderful. So a question then, basically to Olof. You know, when we look at cities, we're moving everyone into urban environments, and we have this food tech revolution. Are there any takes on policy we should think of here? When it comes to, for instance, understanding infrastructural interfaces between houses and society.
It's a leading question, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
No, but I'm not so much against the economy in general as some of my honored colleagues here. I do fundamentally believe that we can see long-term sustainable growth, and that's another topic for debate. But I think if we look at the whole the whole food industry, right? I mean, once upon a time, food production was the vast majority, and as we've seen, the majority of people worked in the production of food. If you look at it today, it's a small sliver of the economy that goes into the actual production, but a rapidly increasing part in services around food, right? Which is again back to more boring topics like access to capital, access to talent. How do you prevent regulations from hindering new innovation and instead embracing and driving innovation in a smart legal and policy way?
Wonderful. We have a question from Hama.
Yes, I'm Hannah. I'm from the Restaurant Academy, and I think this gives me so much inspiration. I think this is great what you're talking about. My question is more about taste and texture. All this is very important, yes, but I think you shouldn't forget about taste and texture, because it was like 30, 40 years ago we were all talking about if we had a pill and we would get all the nutritions within us and that would save the world. Do you have any thoughts about taste and texture as well when you work, when you do your thinking?
John.
Yeah, so my job is actually as an architect, and the only reason for doing what I'm doing right now is because it became clear that we would have to build a platform to get into the conversation around taste and texture, right? Because the reality is this, I'll put it to you very straightforwardly. If we design cities around shitty amateur logistics, we need tons of parking, which should be used, guess what, for growing soft fruits or orchards or herbs or whatever it may be, that would add the taste and texture to the food economy and could be used functionally in the economy. Yeah. And so what I'm saying to you is, unless we have a proper systemic approach to how we design the economy and embed it in space, we will not have the opportunity to truly explore all the sensual kind of sociocultural, aesthetic features of the food economy, because there's just no space or time or money. And so efficiency isn't the goal. See, this is where I distinguish myself from economists. I don't suggest we generate efficiency to give back to the capital holders. I suggest we create efficiency to give back to the people. And so efficiency in spatial terms means taste and texture. It means nature around you, because cars aren't needed so much, because they're considered to be inefficient ways of moving stuff around.
And from my point of view, taste and texture, I translate that into diversity and freshness, because that allows people to do whatever they want in terms of taste. And so we are sort of the enabler of diversity and freshness, which I think would be the cornerstone of taste and texture, actually. It's then up to the chef to fix it, basically.
Fabrizio.
Hi, Fabrizio from Sodexo, and my question is primarily for Mr. Limbo, who maybe can answer because already experienced, but of course all the others can think of this as well. How does a model like the one of Ocado change the relationship with the rest of the supply chain before you, like with the producers? Especially, I'm thinking about small producers. So that is there a change in mindset that has to be applied for meeting the needs of the Ocado model?
Yeah, well, we obviously enable small producers to get access to the market. So by having this huge range where we can stock stuff which from a small producer and make it available to a lot of people, that the sort of barrier to entry comes down. That also means that we can live with shorter shelf life. We can live therefore with sort of fresher produce. Smaller people, we're still at the beginning of that, I would say. We still, since we only sell 2% of all the food in England, we haven't been able to reshape the supply chain completely because the supply chain is still too big and the economics of the supply chain is still too big. But we are introducing every year lots of new companies that cannot get into the supermarkets. They can get into us. If they're successful, they can then get into the supermarket, and in the sort of kind of small kind of way. But I think this is very much, especially if you're from Sodexo, in this prepared food business. But in the prepared food business, it's also about freshness and diversity, right? You want stuff that is unique. You want it what you want, but you also want it really fresh. Otherwise, it doesn't really work.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So in more kind of generic business language, it's called the long tail. All right. So basically, it's things that either are produced or consumed in small volumes, and there's lots of those kinds of. So this is the long tail argument was most developed in the book industry to describe what Amazon did. Is they made the long tail where small amounts of books being written and printed and published, and still people can buy them, which isn't true with conventional booksellers because they have to make a profit on their volume. And so what's happening at the in the more generic sense, beyond the specific dynamics of Ocado, is the long tail is getting a lot of opportunity to come back into the food economy. So if you're a small producer, you have infinite screens to appear on, which wasn't the case in the supermarket-driven economy or even the boutique shop economy because there's very limited shelf space. And then the problem isn't just display, it's how do you manage very limited inventory. If you've got a small amount of some kind of specialist cream, for example, you've got to hit your logistics target super precisely to get the market to clear to sell your stuff. And if you don't get the display right and the logistics right, you're super screwed. So if someone says, I will put you on a shelf, and then on the wrong side of town, you see the point. And so what happens is that this industry is a grand transformation, enables both logistics efficiency and display efficiency, and it means that the long tail of food production is about to have a massive revenge on the supermarkets.
Looking forward to that. Okay, so the final question then for the panelists here. So we've been kind of setting this one up for the last question, which is, of course, so if we construct the new food systems, new service layers around, is that something we could export from Sweden to the rest of the world and make tons of money on and sustain our families and our pensions going forward? Olof. It's a leading question, I know.
I guess I'm defending the capitalist view of the world here, but I mean obviously, right? But I think again, I think what's important here, and I think also what connects the last two questions here a bit is that as we see it, food 30 years from now we will view it as something massively different. And that's a very short personal example. Christmas is coming up here, and my mother-in-law expects us to, pickle the herring and, kill the some animals and, do all the food stuff, and bring to the Christmas dinner. Whereas I'm more, I buy the high-end freeze-dried stuff from Picard and then I cater the rest of it and it's brought to their place. And the point here is that, you're completely moving the whole value chain, right? I mean, taste and texture, right? I mean, I can't cook pasta to save my life, but there are people that can do that in a very professional way. And by the way, I don't eat meat anymore, so I buy substitutes, and none of my friends, I hope no one is in here, they ever discover that it's not meat in my meat sauce anymore, right? It's ump or whatever it is. So you're moving the value chain, you're moving the buckets of value to other organizations, and if we nail that down in Sweden in an even more efficient way, of course we can export it, right? I mean, we have to transform. We should take the lead.
Just to be clear, I mean, I'm super in favor of capital. I just want it to be allocated efficiently and without good theory of products versus services and how that is spatially contextualized. It's not allocated efficiently, which is why Uber exists. I love capital. It's allocated well on this company. It's allocated well on Amazon. So not anti-capital, I'm just anti-inefficiency and bad theory. On city and export and stuff, I think Sweden and the Nordics could export more this overall efficient, integrated urban lifestyle model of food in which services is a part, only for the reason that they are small and integrated economies with very clever second mover industries. What I mean by second mover is that when they move definitively and get it right. So take ICA, for example. ICA is very bad at food delivery right now to the extent there's none of it. Quite possibly they'll be working with these guys, I would just guess, because it's a wonderful matchup in heaven. And that would be an example of second mover. They haven't blundered out there with a shitty product, but when they move, it'll be nationwide and it'll be very good and they'll use the best in the world. And that is what's exportable, because that will be plugged into the smart city design and real estate evolution that we are a part of on the base 2 side. Helping real estate owners design and develop and optimize buildings for service-based businesses and helping cities to do that. So if Sweden and the Nordics demonstrate what they've already demonstrated, which is waiting, watching, learning, boom, and then doing it across, capital, public sector, society, definitely exportable.
Okay, thank you very much. Good answer. Sverker.
Well, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about this making food from electricity bit, because I think that's a unique thing we have in the Nordics. We have pretty cheap electricity. We've used a lot of it to make paper, and paper might not be the sort of thing for the future in the same way. So therefore, we can use that energy abundance that we have and figure out how to make food from energy. That doesn't have to be microorganisms. It could also be plants, I believe. The same kind of equation sort of works, and we could develop a lot of energy-based food ecosystems, if I call it that, and I think that would be extremely exciting.
Okay, thank you very much, panel.